Divine Lightning Radiance was quite a shakeup for the meta as it dethroned Luward from its tier 0 status. But I think the real gold lies in the budget decks that we can find behind these new VR units. Stand up! Vanguard! VBT12 Divine Lightning Radiance is a crazy set with some strong heavy hitters like Gurguit, Gabriel and Vanquisher, which all impacted the meta. This means a lot of attention was drawn to this set after the whole Luward debacle. But within those pillars, we see some powerful budget decks that even are considered as meta relevant options, and today we're going to cover them and some, as in today's budget deck video, we're going to cover the brand new nokiel archetype for Angel Feathers, which puts a heavy emphasis on a damage zone manipulation. For Gold Paladin, we're going back to the aggravain deck as it got upgraded with the brand new Bluish Flame card, which gives the deck some powerful new tricks. Then for Genesis, we're going to go back to an old playstyle as we're going to take a look at a revamped Divine Gauge deck with the new Regalia units. And finally, we're ending the video off with the brand new eradicator archetype for Narukami, which has a very unique boss unit in the form of Dragonic Descendant. Now, any Genesis player might ask the question, what about witches and sorcerers? And yes, they are a new archetype from the set, which is really low budget. But the issue is, the deck doesn't have a well-defined game plan nor win condition. Your main outright play now is to rely on the new grade 3 to bounce back and reuse your Melissas over and over again to just deck out your opponent, which can work, but it doesn't seem like a very fun nor consistent playstyle, unlike the other decks that we're going to feature in this video. Maybe with some more support, we might cover them in another video further down the line. Now, before we go into the video, I need to address that these prices are very speculative, as the set isn't even in its pre-release phase as of the recording of this video. So keep that in mind when we're talking about the prices. So with that all explained, let's tackle the first deck on today's video, which is the brand new nokiel archetype for Angel Feather. This nokiel deck costs around $48 to build. Now, as you might have noticed, I opt to run the nokiel draw PGs, and that rose the price quite a bit, as they alone cost somewhere around $26 for a playset. Now, to clarify, you don't need to play them to make the deck work. You can opt to go for sentinel crits just fine, but including them gives this deck an extra line of play, which we will discuss in a moment. Before we're going to talk about the main grade 3s and going all the way down to the grade 1s, we first need to talk about the grade 0, which is Happy Bell Nokiel. This is the card that allows you to power up your columns from turn 2 onwards. Every card that manipulates a damage zone tries to put every single copy of this card into the damage zone for max potential. So now on to the main grade 3 of the deck, which is also our finisher, is Holy Seraph Nokiel. This card allows us to give ourselves an extra damage. This can be great to prevent our opponents from healing or even set up a cheeky heal for ourselves. Now, our main target is of course Happy Bell in order to empower our board, but this also plays into Holy Seraph's main effect, which allows it to restand the front row for 2 extra attacks, which all are empowered by the Happy Bells. We can take this combo potential one step further with our second grade 3, which is Love Sniper Nokiel. This card allows us to draw any card from the damage zone, so it's a solid plus engine. But more importantly, we can rewrite a Vanguard during the battle phase, which ideally would be a Holy Seraph for a total of 6 attacks, which also generates 2 protect markers and a whole lot of power. To support this engine, we have Love Machine Gun Nokiel in our grade 2 lineup. This card allows us to put any card from our deck into the damage zone and then draw the counterblasted card, which makes this a solid plus engine, and it refunds itself just like Love Sniper. For our out of archetype support cards, we have Hygienist Angel. This can become a massive beater during an Holy Seraph turn that swings twice, as it can get upwards to an additional 45k on this card, which is pretty strong for no cost. The other grade 2 support card is Nurse of Hold Heart. This is another way to get those Nokiels into the damage zone, but it also allows us to get some field control if we combine this with a Happy Bell in our hands. And once again, this card is counterblast neutral. In the grade 1s, we have Scaling Angel. This is a very important supporter, as most of our main engine pieces uses quite a lot of soul. So this card helps us to generate that resources, but it also negates the scenario where we accidentally healed a Happy Happy Bell. So now we can put those cards back into the damage zone, which increases the overall consistency of the deck. The second great one that we play is Underlie Celestial Hazedeal. This card is yet another card that allows us to put nokiels into the damage zone and fetch key cards from the damage zone to our hand. And finally, we have Syringe Lesser. This great one allows us to generate soul while also increasing the power of 2 of our units. This synergizes perfectly with Holy Seraph Nokiel as we generate the soul for all our skills, but we give our front row rearguards that restand an additional 5k power. The overall game plan of the deck is to fill the damage zone with nokiel cards and mainly with Happy Bell nokiels. Once we've done that, we ride into Lost Sniper, which superiorites into Holy Seraph for a total of 6 attacks with decent numbers behind them, and ideally we want to have Hygienist Angel on the side column for maximum power. To get to this scenario, we can rely on the many different cards that allow us to manipulate the damage zone. The best way to get Happy Bells into the damage zone is with Love Machine Gun and Holy Seraph, as they can search them out from the deck directly. The other way to get them into the damage zone is with Hazedeal and Nurse of Hold Heart, as they can put them into the damage zone from our hand. And the final option is with Scalding Angel, which can put them from the drop zone. This gives you the option to redamage them if you healed them, or you can use them as shield from hand. Speaking of healing, Holy Seraph Nokiel heals you a card at the end of the turn if you use its first effect. In most scenarios, you want to heal the non-Happy Bells, but sometimes it might be smarter to heal one of them. If next turn you happen to get a heal trigger, you can heal the non-Happy Bell card, which allows you next turn to search out the 4th Happy Bell, which was safe in deck. But of course, if you were at 5 damage and you go back to 4 and you have a Scalding Angel in hand, you can easily heal the non-Happy Bell, because if you need to heal one of your Happy Bells, you can easily put it back into the damage zone without any problem. So think in advance when you resolve the end turn effect of Holy Seraph. Now the deck has an interesting consistency option in the early game. Because our nokiel cards search nokiel cards, we can even secure our right targets if we have the correct pieces. If we write or call Love Machine Gun Nokiel, we can use its effect to not search a Happy Bell but one of our grade 3 units. We can search the one we miss from our hand for our turn 3 play. If we miss a Holy Seraph, we can put it into the damage zone, and then next turn with Love Sniper we can fetch the Holy Seraph out of the damage zone, setting up for the superior ride itself. In this scenario where we miss a Love Sniper, we can put it into the damage zone, but in order to get it out before next turn, we need to call either a Nurse of Hold Heart or Underlay Celestial Hazedeal in the same turn to get it into our hand before our next ride phase. Now as for the final remarks, let's go back to those draw PGs. Because we can search out nokiels, we have the option to damage a draw PG and then fetch it back into our hand. This allows us to potentially stock up on 3 PGs a turn, including the 2 from the superior ride. This can be very effective against high powered attack decks that focus less on multi-attacking but on high power. So if you have the budget, you can try this out, and otherwise you can go for the more crit heavy variant. It's time to go into our next clan and see what we can build for Gold Paladin with a focus on Aggravain and Percival. So before I even talk about numbers, you need to be aware that you can build a more cheaper version that's solely focused on Percival, but I personally enjoy the Aggravain playstyle more and think that you can get more bang for your buck with this variant. Now that said, this list costs around $76. Of course, the main grade 3 is Knight of Fury Aggravain. This card allows us to increase the multi-attack potential significantly, and nowadays his second ability might actually come up more often thanks to the extra soul charge potential. The second main grade 3 is Bluish Flame Liberator Percival. This card allows us to accelerate our exile markers, which makes Aggravain a lot more potent. This card can be used during the Aggravain call to extend our field even more. The third and final grade 3 is Flywheel Knight Edmund. This card can give us some extra shield, but more importantly, it can generate more free calls for Aggravain over the course of a single game, thanks to the fact it keeps bouncing back to our hand. As for the grade 2s, we have Liberator of the Flute Escrat. This is a nice card to get more free calls and to potentially extend our multi-text when chaining off of an Aggravain superior call. It can also be a nice right target to increase the early game pressure without needing to dedicate more cards from hand. Even a trigger can be used as a booster to overcome force numbers. Followed up, we have Oath Liberator Agloville. This is also a potential right target, but its main use is as a rearguard. As a rearguard, he fulfills a similar role as Edmund, as he keeps bouncing itself back to hand, but more importantly, he synergizes with Percival to generate extra powerful attacks that can result into more multi-attacks. The final grade 2 that we run is Knight of Hard Work Eleanor. She is here mainly as a beater, as this allows Aggravain to build solid numbers, so even defensive triggers won't stop most of our attacks. attacks. Now for grade 1s, we run Listener of Truth Dindrain. She can be used as a draw engine, but most of the time she is used as a countercharge engine, and the fact that she becomes a 10k booster can actually help generate powerful columns. The issue with Dindrain, however, is that she needs to be called via a skill, and to still be able to use Dindrains from hand, we run Knight of Vitality Brenius. Outside of the fact that he allows us to use drawn Dindrains, he also generates more soul for the potential soul plus 12 skill of aggravain. But on top of that, he allows us to be more aggressive in the early game without wasting call potential of aggravain. The final card that we play is Little Battler Tron. This card gives us some nice on-hit pressure in the early game that will make aggravain even more threatening, as your opponent wants to take early attacks to get defensive triggers, but in Tron's case that will give us a free multi-attack call that loads aggravain for one more potential call. This whole deck revolves around aggravain's superior call effect and the combos that arises from that. Now there are two factors to keep in mind. We want to save our cards in the early game for our turn 3 and beyond plays, so we can load up a massive aggravain for maximum firepower. But at the same time, we want to apply pressure in the early game so defensive triggers becomes less of an issue, as defensive triggers are a problem, not game breaking, but it can make the deck turn from a turn 3 OTK playstyle to a turn 4 or 5 strategy. So in order for you to still apply pressure without losing out on cards, you can call an early game Brenius or ride an Agloville for extra calls. Now you could ride an Escrad, but that takes 2 calls away from a potential aggravain turn. So always think about your turn 3 plays when deciding what to ride and to call on turn 1 and 2. As for the combo potential, you can use Edmund and Agloville to increase your overall skill value. You can keep bouncing them back to the hand to have more call targets next turn, or potentially shield value. The great aspect about them is that when you call them via aggravain or Percival in Agloville's case, you can actually plus card advantage as you get those cards in hand. But that also gets us to another point. Agloville and Edmund allows us to empty our board while generating value. They remove 2 cards from the field per copy, which gives us 1 soul and 1 card in hand. This is great for building up our soul count for the potential 12 soul blast ability, but also great against control clans. A third card to this interaction is Eleanor, which can put herself into the soul. So it's possible to empty out your board after you already resolved an aggravain call. Finally, we have Percival. This is of course an important engine piece, as it allows us to generate those extra markers, which allows aggravain to make more meaningful numbers. The interesting part here is that you have 2 choices. You can resolve 1 from hand, or aim to resolve 1 from the back of an aggravain call to extend the multi-attacks. On one hand, you load your aggravain up with more potential superior call targets, and you get the immediate value out of those circles, as they can be used twice in that turn. But on the other hand, it means you keep those potential stronger attackers for the final attacks, which is important in the wake of a defensive trigger. Personally, I would advise to use the first one in the main phase if you have 1 in hand. This allows you to have more call targets, which allows you to pick better units anyways. But on top of that, it will filter your deck even more, so you increase the chances of hitting it next turn if you didn't win that particular turn. Now I want to address, this isn't the deck at full power, as I play a more tweaked list. The issue is, however, it will cost double the value, as the list I use is the following build, and it costs around $152. Now keep in mind, Dindrains and the Draw RPGs are going to get an amazing reprint, which will tank these prices, so the deck might fall around $90 to $100, and maybe lower depending on Percival and Agloville. The main difference is the inclusion of the Grade 3 Searcher, which allows us to increase the chance of getting to a rewrite aggravain for maximum axle marker potential, but it also allows us to get to our supporting Grade 3s, which are all very powerful. Now the final addition are the free copies of Flamewind Lion Wonder SL. This card plays 2 main roles in the deck. They are yet another powerful way to activate drawn Dindrains, but more importantly, he allows us to gain more powerful multi-attacks off the back of an aggravain call. If we called him via aggravain, we can call any of our powerful attackers from hand. And as soon as we could bounce back an Agloville or Edmund, we can recall them again after the Vanguard attacked. But more importantly, we could potentially call a Percival from our hand to the field to extend even more multi-attack shenanigans. So Wonder SL can give aggravain even more firepower when timed right. Now that we looked at aggravain in 2 different ways, let's go over a new Genesis budget deck that focuses on divine gauges. This Artemis Regalia deck costs around $53, from which most lies in the Regalia units and the Grade 3 Artemis cards. The main Grade 3 unit is Cosmic Regalia CEO Yggdrasil. This gives our gauge unit complete protection against almost anything. But the main use of this card is to set up your field with gauge power, boosters, and to combo with Norn. The second grade 3, which is our main grade 3 right target, is Battle Deity of the Night Artemis. She gives her units partial protection, which is good enough against most decks as long as they don't have access to indiscriminately removal. But more importantly, she gives her units extra power and gives the power of triggers to our entire board. For our grade 2s, we play Regalia Fate Norn. This card allows us to give gauges to our units, but more importantly, it allows us to restand our Yggdrasil units for more attacks with decent numbers. The second grade 2 is Twilight Hunter Artemis. This gives us a nice on-hit pressure as well as a potential strong attacker, and combined with Yggdrasil can be a potential strong booster. The other grade 2 that we play is Strongbow of the Starry Knight Elixius. This allows us to fill the soul in the early game as well as open up the field for our gauge units for our late game turns. In the grade 1s, we have Assistant Sorcerer Comnis. This gives us more soul options as well as a bit more power on the board. We also play Swift Runner of the Clear Skies Achilles. This interacts similarly like Ulixis as it opens up the field for our late game units, and it can also turn our columns in a bit better numbers, seeing as we can have grade 2 and 3 boosters. For the final unit that we play is Witch of Frogs Melissa. This is just an extra option which gives us some field control option where we can disrupt our opponent's field setup. The main idea behind this deck is to ride into an Artemis and build a field with complete gauge coverage. Ideally, you have 2 Yggdrasils with Norn on the side columns, which gives you access to 5 attacks, and with the spread of your potential triggers, you can give all your attacks additional criticals. In the early game, you can utilize Ulixis and Achilles to increase your pressure as they remove themselves before you're going to call your gauged units. In the early game, you can use Twilight Hunter Artemis to come with hit pressure, and with Norn, you can stack gauges on her to increase your early attack power. Overall, the deck is pretty self-explanatory, as your main win condition is your restanding Yggdrasil. Of course, you can also have the option to go into her as your Vanguard to protect your field and to have a restandable Vanguard itself. If you ride her as a Vanguard, then Force 1 is probably the better option, but if you go for the Artemis play, then Force 2 gives you more value as you can generate solid numbers on its own. As for the final tip of the deck, you can change the game plan by replacing Artemis with Himiko, and then use her to stack all the criticals and trigger powers onto a rearguard Yggdrasil and swing twice with a potential quad critical unit. This variant has a more OTK potential, but if it fails, you will have less sustainability than the Artemis variant as you lost almost all your resources and power output, so be careful when piloting that variant. Now it's time for the final deck as we take a look at the brand new Eradicator archetype for Narukami. This Narukami Eradicator deck cost around $28, which is fairly cheap for a fun yet potentially powerful deck with future potential. The main boss unit of this deck is Eradicator Dragonic Descendant. This card allows us to get 2 cards on the Vanguard circle and can give us 2 Vanguard swings if we build up the right scenario. And in a final turn plan, we can ride him on top of himself to get access to 3 Vanguard swings, which can be devastating with the extra attacks we generate as an Exile clan. The supporting grade 3 is Eradicator Thunderous Beat Dragon. This card can give some solid numbers on the side columns, but it's also a nice ride target for Descendant as it means he can swing with multiple crits, forcing your opponent to guard the attack, thus gaining the restand consistently. For the grade 2s, we have Lightning Whip Eradicator Stu Hill. He's a solid beater on an Exile circle as he can be a 19 to 24k attack, but he is mainly a card that allows us to bind our opponent's units for free while getting access to some cycles. Another great card is Eradicator Spark Raised Dragon. This gives us more consistency as it searches any card from the deck in the top 5 cards, and it has a nice on-hit effect. This forces our opponent to guard our attacks, which synergizes nicely with Descendant as we can give these abilities to Descendant himself. We also play Lightning Cannon Eradicator Coruscant in our grade 2s. This gives us access to a 2-card combo that generates a good powerful column while also giving us more draw, cycle, and field control power. The final grade 2 is a clan staple card, which is Fiendish Sword Eradicator Cho-Oh. This gives us even more multi-tech options as well as a field control play. He is even better now as we can attack with a Vanguard first, give all the triggers to him, and then swing twice with a powered up Cho-Oh. In the grade 1s, we play Isolate Eradicator Nusku. This is another consistency card that allows us to dig towards the pieces we need during the mid to late game, just like your grade 2 Spark Raised Dragon. The second grade 1 is the second card of the duo with Coruscant, which is Lightning Rival Eradicator Oban. He together with Coruscant can generate a solid 23k column, and he is also a countercharger, which allows us to pay for our various counterblasting skills. For the final card in the deck, we play Thundering Arm Eradicator Gassen. He allows us to move more cards to the front row so we get access to the entire field with our various bind skills. The main idea behind this deck is to use the Descendant as your main power card to overwhelm your opponent. To activate his restand skill, we want to force our opponent to guard the attack. This is the reason why we run 12 crits, as it means it's really risky for our opponent to just no guard the attack to prevent the second Vanguard swing. So try to push your opponent to high damage where you get more consistent access to the restand, as otherwise his power is cut in half. Descendant's copy ability is quite unique, as we can have various combinations with varying degree of success. The prime target is Thunderous Beat Dragon, as this means we have a much stronger Vanguard attack. And it also comes with 2 crits, and once they guard that attack, it comes with 3 crits for the second attack. The issue here, however, is that it's really slow, as we first needed to ride Thunderous himself, and this combo is also quite counterblast heavy. For a much faster play, we can ride over grade 2 and we would ride over Sue Hill, but we much rather want to call him onto an Axel Circle for more power. The ideal target is Spark Raised Dragon, as this means we already had a powerful grade 2 play with a 14k Vanguard that came with hit pressure, and we could search for a card from the top 5. But now we also get that on our grade 3 turn, as Descendant becomes a 17k attacker that allows us to search for another card once again, and he swings with the unhit pressure, which he does for both attacks. So either you get 2 Vanguard swings, or you get an extra draw, and potentially even both if they couldn't block the second attack. And finally, we can also ride Descendant on top of Descendant for a potential triple Vanguard swing. Now it's important to note that this deck is fairly consistent, as it has a lot of cycle and search power. Both Nusku and Spark Raised Dragon can trade a card from hand for any Eradicator card in the top 5 cards of your deck, which gives you a lot of control over your future plays. And on top of that, we also have Sue Hill, which is a cycle card with more value, and even the Corson and Oban column are effectively a double cycle engine, as you bind the entire column on both boards, so you lose 2 units, but you draw 2 new cards, so you don't lose out on value. Now, depending on your game state, it might not always be beneficial to fire off the Corson combo, as you will probably get more value by keeping the 23k beater alive on the board. So always weigh your options when utilizing those 2 cards. Now, as for the final tip, think careful about your Axel markers, as Axel 1 does have a part to play in a certain scenario. It makes your Cho turn into 2 19k attackers instead of 14k attackers, and it makes Sue Hill into a 14k beater instead of 19k. So it can definitely make a difference, but it all depends on the matchup and which cards you have in your hand. And with that, we've seen all the new budget deck options for VBT12 Divine Lightning Radiance. It's been a fun ride, and I have to say, this set really stepped up their budget deck game, as we now have a solid build for each clan of the set, Ever Genesis, maybe even 2, with some little work on the sorcerer side. As we have a pretty strong no-kill deck for Angel Feather, a nice new upgrade for the aggravain deck with Percival, and you could maybe just make a Percival centered deck if you want to go a different route. We also saw the new Regalia units in action, and finally the new Eradicator archetype with a very interesting boss unit in the likes of Dragonic Descendant. So now the floor is to you to try these decks out before the season shifts to a more fish-infested playing field. And that concludes our budget deck video for VBT12 Divine Lightning Radiance. If you're interested in these decks, then definitely try them out, but keep in mind the information provided in this video is just the bare basics, with the main emphasis while building these decks is to keep it on a budget. So there are definitely multiple ways how you can improve the decks by increasing its budgets and also trying out different tactics and cards. So try to experiment with the list that we featured in today's videos, and you might find your own budget deck or your own personal deck that you can play with for years to come. And if you're interested in other budget deck alternatives, then check out this playlist where we go over all the different budget deck options for the previous sets for Vanguard, all the way back to VBT5 Aerial Steed Liberation. So there's quite a lot to explore. As always, this video has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one!